Good evening and welcome back everybody. So now we have come to, after a sumptuous course of very intense and interactive working sessions, we have come to the dessert. And the cherry on the cake is of course the Union Minister for Law and Justice, who is amidst us right now. And according to me, this is the most important session of the conference, where the different strands of the rule of law in the form of various topics we have discussed are sought to be fused in terms of how the legal profession has to position itself, look outward and look inward, and play its role effectively as a torchbearer in the society, as was envisaged by our founder, Motilal Setalva, who was quoted during the inauguration ceremony by President Anil B. Now, without much ado, I will request the dignitaries on the dais to kindly come and take their place. Mr. Salman Khurshid, as you know, has been a very eminent member of the bar and does not need any introduction in the legal fraternity. And it is not only that we are privileged to have him as the chief guest for the valedictory session. The person like him with moderate, intellectual, and forward-looking views is the kind of personality which is required to adorn the office of Minister of Law and Justice of this country. So, we are privileged as a legal community and as a country to have an erudite person like him as Law Minister. Sir, we had very fruitful working sessions and a very intense conference, and one good aspect has been that we had a very large participation from outside Delhi, from various nook and corners of the country. Approximately 20 states have been represented in this conference, and we had a large participation of lawyers, including from the northeast to as far as Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. And with these words, I will request Mr. Anil Divan, our president, to come and give his address. Mr. Divan.
That the disciplinary system is not working. The disciplinary system of self-regulation is not working as it ought to, and what we should think about is, should we bring in the disciplinary committees some outside neutral element? This is something which we must all ponder. As far as the judiciary is concerned, we have had rough times. We have had 2 impeachments and 2 resignations. One was Justice Dinakaran, other was Justice Soumitra Sen. All the media publicity, and today of course the media publicity is very strong. doesn't do credit to our legal system. But we have to follow it. In the old days, if something like this was found, peer pressure, pressure from the colleagues, pressure from the bar, senior members of the bar, would have probably led to a quiet resignation. Not all this hullabaloo in the press, in the electronic media, etc. So this is something again, how do we restore peer pressure? How do we work on this? One more thing, as far as the judiciary is concerned, some of you might have read it. A speech was made by a retired judge of the Supreme Court, a very, very respected judge, Madam Ruma Pal. She made in November last year a speech commemorating in memoriam of Justice Takunde. There is a Justice Takunde Memorial Lecture Series. And she pointed out, it's a speech worth reading, what she called 7 sins. 7 sins which according to her have always troubled her. And I'll just give you the buzzwords one by one. First, brushing aside under the cup. And she was talking of the judiciary. Second, hypocrisy. Third, secrecy. Fourth, prolixity and sometimes plagiarism. 5, stare decisis not being followed because of intellectual dishonesty. Judicial arrogance. And last but not the least, nepotism. Face value, she called it. Now these are things which are worth thinking about because we are looking inward and outward. And to conclude, one thing which strikes me is, today in our polity, we are pointing fingers at each other all the time. For some time it's good, point out the faults of others, etc. But in that process, once it becomes too much, what happens is, instead of doing some constructive things, we are only pointing fingers at each other, and we are creating a climate of confrontation. I think younger people, both in the opposition, in the government, in every party, have to ask themselves whether, across party lines, can they not have some minimum constructive program? Because our economy is suffering today because of this confrontation. So this is one thing on which younger politicians who are in power can come together and at least advance something as a minimum program if they are able to work it. And before I conclude, let me quote from the famous speech of President John F. Kennedy, his inaugural speech given as far back as 1961. And I quote, "United, there is little we cannot do in a list of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do. Let both sides explore what problems unite us instead of belaboring each other and highlighting those problems which divide us." And then the famous celebrated works. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. In this spirit, may I request the Honorable Law Minister to make his presentation and enlighten us on his thoughts on inward looking and outward looking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor to be invited here for the Valedictory, and honor too to be in the presence of distinguished members of the bar, leaders of the bar like you, my good friend Mr. Rao, Mr. Prashant Kumar, Mr. Yakesh Anand on stage, and to have some legends in the audience with Mr. Jethamalani, Mr. Desai, many distinguished friends. I should have been here for the inauguration, and I believe that was your first preference. But I came for the Valedictory because we had a As I explained, post-mortem of our efforts in Uttar Pradesh, and the criminal lawyers there will be surprised if the body returns beyond the post-mortem. And therefore, nothing remains of the case, frankly, if the body is back. And fortunately, I'm here and in your midst, amongst students and some very, very distinguished colleagues. And I'm really honored that I can be with you today. And that too on a topic of such seminal importance, such significance as rule of law crisis and the need for radical reform. I saw the newspapers this morning and I read an item that appeared, presumably because of a speech here made by somebody, all of us, and I certainly admire greatly and honor and whom I cherish greatly for his views, for his guidance and for his role in the Indian judiciary, Chief Justice J.S. Verma, speaking of accountability of judges and using words that for him were appropriate, to me appeared very, very sharp rebuke of what we are trying to do in terms of the Judicial Status and Accountability Bill. I have promised to consult with him further on this, and I will. My impression was that there was a sense in the country, not just amongst people involved in the legal system and supportive of the legal system, but also many others in the civil society who have made a pitch for radical reform and radical improvement of accountability procedures in this country, and who made repeated demands that the accountability principles must be pervasive and must actually reach the level of judicial